I've only a question.
I know, it's what I heard.
I've been there a lot, so you gotta.
I'm very impressed.
Event. Okay.
Well, welcome everybody. Good to see you all tonight. Hi Linda, hi Susan. I'm Cameron Teese, I'm the Dean of James Madison College, and we're glad to see you all here tonight. It is my pleasure to introduce our Stephen O. Murray Visiting Scholar in Residence, Christopher Connor. The Murray Scholar is made possible by a generous gift from Stephen Murray's husband, Keelong Hong. Stephen himself was an alum of JMC and an independent scholar focusing on LGBTQ issues during his long and productive career. Chris Connor is a 2015 PhD in sociology from UNLV and is now an assistant professor at the University of Missouri at Columbia. His research lies at the intersection of criminology, deviance, social movements, technology, gender and sexuality, and social theory. Chris's work has been published in a variety of journal outlets, including Critical Sociology, The Sociological Quarterly, Deviant Behavior, Symbolic Interaction and Sexualities. He's also published a book, and I think you have a new book coming out soon, is that right?
November 20th.
November 20th, stay tuned.
And another one after.
Productive guy. He's also the 2023 recipient of the Kathy Charmé Early and Career Award given by the Society for the Study of Symbolic Interaction. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Christopher Connor.
Thank you so very much. That was a beautiful introduction, and I'm just delighted, frankly, to be the Murray Scholar for this year. I've got no doubt that
Is your mic on? All right.
it's just like when I'm teaching back at home. I've got the red light. How's that? Oh, there we go. Okay. As I was saying, I have no doubt Professor Murray and I would have been great friends had we crossed paths. We're both trained in similar intellectual traditions, both doing similar kinds of work, and he seems like a very interesting individual. It's refreshing, if not somewhat disheartening, going through the archives and seeing how much things have changed and yet how much they remain the same. And I'll come back to that at several points in the talk. But before I get too ahead of myself, my talk today is titled Policing Desire, How Digital Surveillance Turns Queer Intimacy into Crime. And the subject matter of my talk deals with how dating apps, most notably Grindr, have been linked to a number of assaults, homicides, financial crimes, and by police as an ever-expanding surveillance apparatus targeting queer people. So what I'm going to do first is introduce the topic, go over Grindr, what it is, and then move into the literature I draw on, followed by methods, findings, and the different types of crime. And I'll unpack the social processes that I think underlie what's going on here, and conclude with some policy suggestions. And because I hate doomerism, because it's everywhere right now, I'm going to offer some glimmers of hope that I see happening every day within queer communities. So I like to leave on a high note. Queer people, in addition to being highly innovative and finding alternative ways of connecting, have a long tradition of being early adapters of technology. And so it's no wonder that the first geolocation dating app was founded by a queer person living in Hollywood. Research by Pew shows that 30% of Americans have used a dating app or website, but that number is dramatically higher for queer people. Some 51% of all LGBT people that Pew interviewed have used a dating app. So this is very much part of our culture and how we connect. So for those not familiar with what a geolocation dating app is, They differ from websites because they sort users according to a grid by proximity, meaning if I pulled up the app right now and let's say Elizabeth or Cameron were on it, I'm going to pick on them, it would show them as being close to me, and they'd probably be the first users that would pop up. It allows you to see who's around you looking to connect, date, find intimacy, or something else. For comic book fans, I liken Grindr to Gay Cerebro. If you're familiar with the X-Men, allows you to find where the gays are. One user I interviewed for my earlier studies on the app focuses on how gay men, the article focuses on how gay men reproduce normative hierarchies of beauty. And he said, if a gay man is on their phone, I assume they're on the app right now, which again, just speaks to how much of our culture these apps play. Grindr was launched in 2008, and initially it was embraced as a great liberator at a time when neighborhoods were becoming gentrified, forcing LGBT people out of those places and making them very expensive to go out. Gone are the days of cheap drinks at the gay bars. Research by cultural geographers found that a majority of gay folks are what we call identity commuters, meaning they don't live in those areas, but they commute to them in order to basically, I guess, drink from the wellspring of queer culture. Some scholars have even gone as far to say that this potentially liberates queer people from being regulated to the neighborhoods. This is a critique. By allowing us to transform space around us digitally, allowing us to be gay anywhere. I have a little bit of a problem with that, but anyway. The irony is that I've been in queer spaces where users are at a bar, talking with someone just a few feet away, but they're on the app, right? Talking to them instead of going up and introducing themselves. And it's something I'm not afraid to admit that I'm guilty of just as much as anyone else. The point is, these apps have really changed the way we interact in queer spaces, and COVID has definitely accelerated that a lot. Many users also complain that despite the app's ease to find partners, translating desire into action is in practice not that common, meaning they might be on the app, but the actual act of hooking up or meeting up is less likely to happen. Criticisms aside, for many in the queer community, apps like Grindr are the only source of community they have. And apps can be used to facilitate relationships that extend outside the realm of sex and be tools that I personally use to find 3 hairstylists, a private tour of Parliament, coffee dates, brunch outings, and all kinds of other encounters. Living in places like Topeka, Galesburg, Illinois, which is west of Peoria, Columbia, Missouri, these became an outlet and a salvation for me in some respect. In the old days, you just pick up a gay newspaper and find out where to go, what there was to do. Now it's largely on the apps. Despite these positive features, there's an extensive body of literature highlighting the forms of sexual racism, focus on normative standards of beauty, and a great deal of heteronormativity reproduced on the app. To be fair, these trends have always been part of queer culture, but online they become really heightened and exaggerated in ways that are not the best. Rather than focus on how these apps allow for queer community, I want to talk about how these apps allow us to survey and police one another as a community, and the safety of these apps. After all, you're inviting a stranger potentially into your home, and know where someone is within feet or meters. There's a lot of stalking cases that we uncovered where people were able to actually find someone's home just by using the app. And so this begs the question, like, what risk or vulnerabilities might LGBT persons face, especially right now in this political climate? And in asking this, I really draw on 4, I call them 4 pillars or 4 different literatures. First is the litany of studies exploring online dating. Since I began publishing on Grindr, a plethora of studies have come out. When I first started publishing on this, it was pretty hard because I had to also talk about what the app was to people who probably never have even accessed a dating website, or especially not an app like Grindr. All I have to say, I've had a fair share of reviewer number twos. For those who are in the scholarly world, you'll get what I mean. Most of these studies, they expand Isaiah Green's concept of the sexual field, which is a place where individuals seek intimate partners and vie for sexual status, creating what he calls sexual capital, which is connected to real capital, right? So that gym membership, it costs money. Those Botox injections aren't free. Within gay spaces, youthfulness, muscularity as a sign of masculinity, and whiteness all play a role in this sexual capital. I recall one interview with a gay man in Vegas who I interviewed for one of my previous articles. He said the gay club has always been the young man's gig, is what he called it. The second literature I draw on is the focus on platform affordances. This is a relatively new area of scholarship coming out, and this idea of moral acceleration. So when scholars talk about platform affordances, what they're really talking about is how these apps are structured in a way that produces a particular outcome. So Facebook's decision to prioritize engagement over trustworthiness or truth means that the most extreme content is going to rise to the top. Dating apps like Grindr, they prioritize photos of the users, and they also, when you create an account, they have different categories based on body type and other aspects of sexual capital. And this means that users are basically reduced to their most basic traits, right? There's no hobby or politics field. There's no markers of other identity. It's all about looks. And it seems as though it's freeing, but as I'll argue throughout, these are actually pre-configured notions of identity. According to Gottschalk, apps also disrupt the interaction process by simultaneously speeding the process up and fragmenting conversations. So for users, this means one goes from polite introductions to exchanging of nude photos very quickly. One user I interviewed said that, quote, they get to know others a lot quicker in real life. And it's easy to be intimate with strangers who we barely know, and harder to get to know people that we might see mowing the lawn the next day. So this idea of anonymity plays a huge role. And as I'll argue, that also leads to the ability to use these apps for more nefarious purposes. But because these interactions are fragmented, they can also break down and become negative much quicker. We've all had email exchanges that quickly spiral out of control and end up being not the best, let's say. Arguably, offline compatibility emerges much slower and take time and take care, whereas online interactions, because of their sped up nature, happen way quicker. As Simon Gottschalk would have said in class, do you prefer the thrill of the chase or the big finish? I also draw on what's known as the internet disinhibition syndrome, which is the phenomenon by which we're more likely to be our worst selves online because we perceive we're anonymous. It's easy to be mean to a stranger. Some call this the Gyges effect, which is a reference to Plato's allegory of the ring of Gyges, and the idea that if one could be invisible, they would become a twisted version of themselves. To think about it in another way, Gollum from Lord of the Rings, he becomes twisted because of the ring's ability to make him invisible. Third, critical studies of the internet, most notably the work of the very prolific Cory Doctorow, who writes about platform capitalism, and it's the notion that app makers prioritize financial gain above anything else. They make money by keeping us on those apps and keep us coming back, right? So they don't necessarily have a vested interest in connecting us, they have a vested interest in hooking us. On Grindr, which recently became publicly traded in 2020, many users note that now there's a lot of bots, there's a lot of other platform affordances that get users to subscribe, and this has caused a group of investors to put together a bid. I can't remember the dollar amount, but they basically want to take control of the company to take it from being a publicly traded company to a private company because it's just unusable. The frequency of ads, bots, spam messages make it something it wasn't intended to be, they argue. And this is also this use of bots, this use of fake accounts. This is a strategy that even straight dating sites and dating apps use because if nothing's happening, no one's going to use the app, right? So anyway, there's also kind of a newer scholarship that focuses on dopamine delivery and apps and the toxic reward systems within these spaces. And that's going to be key for the drives, motives, and rationalizations as to why cyber criminals are able to use these apps. And they have a kind of perverse psychological reward they get from victimizing people. And then finally, I just situate this as part of queer criminology, which highly underdeveloped, but essentially the main argument that I draw on from that work is that LGBT people, because we've had an antagonistic, let's say, relationship with policing, we tend not to rely on police agencies when we're victims of crime, and that LGBT people have this additional dimension when they are victims of crime that need to be considered. I also want to note that there's a recent publication put out by the Government Accountability Office that notes that cybercrime siphoned $12.5 billion off the economy, and some estimate that's about 1 to 4% of GDP. So this isn't just a minor thing. This is part of a much bigger issue that the same government is not really tracking. Methods, this is where it gets interesting. So we used a multiple methods research framework that includes content analysis of TikTok videos. I'll talk about all this in a bit more detail. News articles, Freedom of Information Act's requests to law enforcement agencies. I personally became aware of this. I was sitting in my office and a reporter wanted to interview me about a case in Chicago he was writing about. 2 gay men during the month of June, which is Pride Month, were brutally assaulted and robbed. And the reporter said that this was part of a, quote, viral TikTok trend, which was something completely new to me. And I still don't know anything about TikTok. I've got research assistants, thank God. I was also getting attorneys calling me from LA who had clients who they needed to defend. There was also a group of fraudsters in Columbia, Missouri that I became aware of, some of which I think might have targeted students. Anyway, we can talk more about that after the talk or whatever. When I began researching this, I had my student researchers who can't be here hunt this down, and they were very quickly, oh yeah, we know what that is. Leave it to the students to know everything about what's going on in society. One of the interesting aspects to social media is the amount of information people share about themselves online. And there's a lot of people engaging in criminal behavior that have no problem posting about it to TikTok quite openly. And this proved very useful as part of our analysis because it gave us some insight into the demographics of who's doing this and the motives. We also accessed forums on the dark web in which scammers basically trade techniques and info You need a special browser to access it. I don't recommend it. And initially, I naively thought, oh, of course the police are going to, work with me on this. This is a great, way we could work together. And especially because law enforcement agents were at Pride this year in droves. So this is a research artifact, let's say, from Kansas City. And I approached one of these agents and asked him about this phenomenon, and his response to me was very disheartening. He said, well, people just need to protect themselves online. We really don't track these types of crime. It's not our responsibility. He went on to say some stuff that I don't want to get into, but for me, it's the coldness of his response, this lack of sympathy for others in the community, and this reframing of victimhood as stupidity that I think is like the most jarring thing. We've also been working with the Australian police, who are way ahead of this. They're actually taking a proactive stance. They're engaging in community forums. They are tracking these. There's a couple officers, a whole team actually, who are tracking these. And they helped me really get started because, again, they have a pretty sophisticated profile of who scammers are in Australia. UK, same way, they're really tracking this. The FBI, DOJ, other agencies at the national level wrote back some scathing letters. One of them even said that we, meaning them, weren't my research assistants. It was kind of like Pam Bondi might have read it or something. There were a handful of agencies that were a delight to work with, most notably the San Francisco PD, the motherland, as I like to call it, the Columbia, Missouri police, which I was shocked, but most denied our requests, or they wanted us to pay fees ranging from $3 all the way up to $9,546.83 at the top end. So that's one way law enforcement kind of keeps reporters out of what's going on and researchers. They don't want us poking around. And I'm going to talk about why I think that is here in a second. So when official statistics failed us, and we had a grant, but when the current administration took office, that funding got pulled. So we turned to this method as a proxy. And of course, this comes with a lot of issues, and again, we can talk about that during the Q&A. But I think it gives us a window as to how prevalent this might be, and it at least gives us a qualitative analysis as to like what's going on and what how these apps are being used for crime. Right now we have 3 grants pending, which will help us fund a nationally representative sample of LGBT cybercrime, but we won't know much about those till December. If that happens, I'll be sure to give you all an update, hoping, fingers crossed. For our media reports, we saw essentially 5 types of crime. So our database is roughly 100 cases. There were no states that did not have some instance of this. There's, I think, 4 cases in Michigan, relatively close to Lansing. So these 5 types of crimes were what we found in this very sparse FOIA requests, which were returned, and some minor or similar patterns as the Australians that we're working with in the UK authorities. The first type of crime we found were violent crimes. Assaults, robberies, and homicides account for roughly 58% of the crimes that we were able to find. One thing I found while working on this project was there is a presence of alt-right groups on these apps that know about Grindr and who have used it. To what ends, I don't really know. It could be a plethora of things, from wanting to lure folks out and victimize them, or it could just be repressed sexual identity. Unfortunately, I don't know that I'll ever be able to get the data on that because those cases are likely pretty small. Sextortion was the second most common type of crime. That's 15% of our sample. This included threats to the victim, saying they would basically release their chat logs, which will often include their nude photos, to friends and family, and some type of financial extortion, where essentially the victim is told they need to give them some sum of money, and once you send one sum of money, then they ask for it again and again and again. The third category we found was influencer crimes, which are, again, probably one of the more sinister crimes we found. There's a individual doing this in the Michigan area I just found out about. The Australians call this, and I absolutely love this term, posting and boasting. So this is when an individual films themselves doing a crime and they post it to TikTok, Instagram, any social media platform. And this involves filming themselves assaulting gay men and accusing them of some kind of grooming behavior. I've got an interesting case in the slides that I'll show. And this type of content's extremely popular. There's even a live streamer on a platform that Amazon owns, Twitch.tv, if you're familiar, who brings his chat along for the ride. Fourth, and this one's the one that I find most troubling, is the number of police stings and decoy operations using fake profiles. And I'll expand on that here in a minute. I also want to note that just because this is 100 cases, one of these cases involves 200 men. So finding out like the prevalence was also kind of a difficult challenge. But often these cases involve multiple victims. There is a kind of underreporting of this type of crime, and again, I'll talk about that here in a minute. Geographically, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Texas, New York City, and California were among the top places that had the most activity. And it mirrors places with a high concentration of gay folk. There's also a temporal dimension. This crime was essentially non-existent before 2021. There were a few isolated cases we found, but essentially this is driven by pandemic lockdowns in which human interaction kind of went to a halt. And this follows other trends that we see in other criminological realms where crime essentially went online. So now law enforcement agencies are kind of ramping up their surveillance system as a response to that. I already talked about how this is vastly undercounted. That has to do with hypermasculinity and ideas held by gay men about their masculinity. But there's also like a stigma attached to this, right? Because the victims often feel like it was their fault. So there's this kind of shame associated with it. There's also a lot of community distrust with police, and the Australians have talked with me at length about this. It's hard for them to help and resolve these types of crimes if they don't know that they're going on. So they're trying to work with law enforcement over there to partner with them to kind of restore trust. First type I want to go into is police surveillance. So sociologically, police surveillance best illustrates how dating apps are now tools of control and an extension of the panoptic gaze. Online users debate over the acceptability of this. Some gay men say, well, you just shouldn't be so promiscuous and on the apps all the time and you wouldn't be a victim. And this kind of links it up with the idea of respectability politics and assimilationist versus resistance strategies. So Marcuse argued that freedom requires resisting consumerism's colonization of desire. So part of what's driving this, all of this, are the ways in which apps force queer bodies into pre-configured traits and this desire to be normal, this desire to be like everybody else. This case, this story was very interesting. A law enforcement agent created a fake profile, and if the victim even mentioned using marijuana during their meetup, they would be charged with drug trafficking. There's others to be sure. This one is real recent. So since June of this year, 200 men have been busted in New York City for using a dating app known as Sniffies. Again, that's where these kind of debates come out about promiscuity that you see online. Philosophical debates aside, this is a severe overstep of policing. If the police were really interested in solving crime, they'd probably devote those resources towards investigating the assaults that happen through the app. It's basically criminalizing people for trying to find intimacy in a world that's continuously disconnected, isolated, and where people feel lonely. It's also a use of technologies to monitor, survey, and criminalize gay men, which you can link up with authoritarianism via Theodore Adorno, one of my favorite philosophers. He calls this this obsession with others going on or others having sex is what he's alluding to. The second category we found was blackmail, sextortion, and fraud. I originally thought that this was going to be the #1 case. I did not expect assaults to represent most of the cases out there. These cases involve individuals using the app to obtain photos. They're then used against their subject for some kind of blackmail, fraud. What this shows us, again, kind of taking it back to sociology, is that even going online, queer people still face issues relating to their identities. And it's weaponized against them. Stigma for being gay still exists, and it really reinforces shame around queer bodies and conservative values about sex. I didn't think we would be have this problem in 2025, but here we are. The Geiges effect, or internet disinhibition syndrome, is also kind of underlying this. Our counterparts in Australia found that offenders often target bisexual men, closeted men, and those who are working professionals, over 40, single, and they target rural areas specifically. So these are, the idea being that those users, they perceive that they're anonymous online, and so they go on to experiment with their identity, their sexual identity, in spaces where it might not be okay to be open about that. And so Grindr's kind of been a refuge, but that also opens them up for this type of crime. This profile that the Australians found, we also found as well, but it follows a training manual that you can find online that's distributed to employees in call centers devoted to cybercrime. Some of these are in the global south. Again, I can talk more about that later. These types of crimes are also known as pig butchering, the idea being that you fatten the pig up before you slaughter it. In this case, it's giving someone praise, telling them how good they look, telling them how wonderful they are, and then you ask them for something. You ask them for some financial reward. And there's lots of cases of this where, and mostly the literature on this focuses on women who are victimized. Not a lot about LGBT folk, but in many cases, people who are saving for retirement have their entire savings demolished. There's also a number of college cases for college students who are targeted. In these cases, it's people who are just starting to find out who they are, right? There's 3 cases this year, I believe, in Columbia, Missouri, of students. And there's even some here in Lansing. Assaults, robberies, homicides, and hate crimes, those are the next category. Top number of cases we found. Some of this may be selection bias because we relied on news accounts. And I'm sure many of you have heard the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. News outlets love stories about the most heinous crimes. And so they'll often publish those because they're newsworthy. But San Francisco PD, who, again, really great to work with, their data that they gave us showed us that these crimes are on the rise. So they've been rising every year for the last 3 or 4 years. And they're the largest category, even in, again, the motherland. And the most infamous of these is the Grindr killer, who is essentially a modern-day Jeffrey Dahmer, who used the apps to lure men to his location and then murdered them. HBO Max has a special. I believe there's a Netflix special. I can't quite remember, but it's for those of you who love true crime, check it out. So this actually really was a surprising finding. We found that there were a number of cases where a former lover created a fake account, lured their ex-boyfriend to a location to victimize them, to do something to them. There was one particular case where an ex-lover would send people to his ex-boyfriend's house. So his ex-boyfriend was getting random people showing up to his door who he had no idea who they were. Some of the info we obtained suggests that the people behind these crimes have some kind of moral commitment about gender or moral hang-ups about sexual orientation. We put carjackings into that mostly because we didn't know where to put them. But most of these assaults involve some kind of robbery, and most often it was to steal the person's phone, which gains access to banking information, or to carjack them. And also, just the other day, I was on Instagram scrolling through, and there was a gay travel influencer who was victimized. His phone was stolen, and so he was locked out of all his banking. So he's kind of trapped overseas. The violence, it's physical, but it's also symbolic. It punishes queer visibility. It reproduces the message that the closet once reinforced. Queer desire has to stay invisible, or it will be made an example of, is what these criminals are trying to do. In that sense, the violence becomes the most literal and most visible form of digital discipline, drawing on Foucault. Our friends in Australia, press releases by law enforcement and several news reports talk about a viral TikTok trend. This is that posting and boasting I talked about earlier. The ages of these individuals are between 12 and 25. And essentially they're filming themselves attacking gay men on camera. This is a very high profile case that I can't remember if it's this year or last year. 12 fraternity brothers at the campus of Salisbury University, located in Maryland, lured a older gay man out and then filmed themselves beating him, slapping him. The video's out there. I was never going to show it in this presentation, but if you're so inclined, it's pretty horrific. They've been expelled, and they are awaiting trial. So one of the things, though, that I would kind of impress on people is our laws haven't caught up to this kind of crime. So whether or not they are convicted or not remains a mystery. So this viral TikTok trend is where social media influencers sell themselves as digital vigilantes, ridding the world of harmful pedophiles. And some people, their initial reaction might be, well, is that so bad? Well, hold on. There's a lot of selective editing that influencers do to create a narrative. And most of the time, these accounts don't even show their audiences the quote unquote evidence that they've gathered. And some of them claim that they're working with law enforcement, but I think they're just basically actors. And prosecutors are reluctant to prosecute these cases for a lot of obvious reasons. One is that no crime was actually committed. The second being that any evidence that these influencers found is now tainted, and it makes prosecuting it difficult at best. And lawyers that we were able to talk to who were either prosecuting people like the fraternity brothers or who are representing clients who've been accused of some kind of activity, noted that they use fake accounts, they use fake IDs, they might use fake uniforms. Essentially, they're basically trying to scare the people that they've lured to their location. It reinforces these heteronormative cultural tropes about groomers, ageist tropes about older gay men that go back to the 1900s, and a highly calculated nature of cruelty online. And getting victims to report these crimes is equally problematic because often juveniles will engage in this type of crime and they'll tell the victims, oh, you can report this, but we're going to get a light sentence, and once we're out, we're going to come back and do something even worse to you. And essentially they're silencing their victims and keeping people in silence. The Australians note that some of this has an organized crime element to it and are very sophisticated. We know relatively less about this over here, but it would not surprise me if the same pattern's happening. There's a range of underlying social processes I want to unpack. Social psychology, interpretive sociology, and critical sociology that has a lot to say about why this is happening, what's driving this. The structural elements underlying these processes is the commodification of love. These apps exist for increasingly individualized markets. I mentioned earlier, Grindr is now a publicly traded company, and so they have a commitment to investors to drive up users, to drive up time spent on the app, because they can serve their users ads, which they then derive revenue from. So they don't have an interest in really connecting. By incorporating gamified features and bots, spam accounts, which some think they may be doing, it makes content moderation really hard. So if there are criminals on the apps, it's hard to distinguish them from these bot accounts. The rise in these apps' popularity also says a lot about society and our desire to connect with each other, but needing to do so quickly and efficiently. And in doing so, one could argue that you're really separating yourself from the act of love, from the true act of intimacy. This speed creates a culture where cybercrime is much possible. So cyber criminals love to accelerate the process, create a sense of urgency within the user that they're trying to victimize, and also lure them to other apps that might give them more info about who they are. Marcuse saw technology as capable of either liberating or subverting human instincts. In our case, apps that promise connection instead convert intimacy into surveillance. They turn the search for pleasure into data for control. Apps, rather than allow freedom and liberation, subvert those liberating instincts and pervert them to tools of surveillance and biopower. Palantir is one of the companies that operates a backend for Grindr for law enforcement agencies to log into. And if you know anything about Palantir, I'm curious as to what else they're doing with that data. There's also this kind of dark social psychology that app makers have spent quite a lot of money harnessing. They employ a number of behavioral scientists from sociology, anthropology, other disciplines to amplify the addicting qualities of these bots. So the tools of social science basically are being used to make them addictive and habit forming. One of the things that has been engineered is this swiping motion that we all do on apps, and that's purposeful. It's like a Vegas slot machine. We can think of our phones as this kind of Pavlovian instrument of control and reward. Every platform has its own cue, its own sound that then attaches itself to our brains. A chime might mean a sale. A ping might mean someone liked us, wants to meet us. A vibration means that a stranger wants to connect. Each cue activates what hard science folks call the mesolimbic dopamine pathway. Try saying that 3 times. But it's the circuit associated with anticipation and reward. And so now our social life is being bound and hijacked by apps who keep us checking, swiping, and scrolling. In this essence, or in this sense, it's the phone isn't just a communication tool, but a conditioning device. Over the last decade, psychologists and sociologists have drawn our attention to what's known as the dark triad. So some of you may have heard about this, but there's 3 overlapping personality traits that are amplified online. The first is Machiavellianism, which is this idea of calculated manipulation and strategic deceit. Second is narcissism, centered on self-promotion and the constant pursuit of validation. There's a number of studies on Instagram and how that has changed things and reoriented us to be more narcissistic. And psychopathy, which captures impulsivity and the willingness to harm or humiliate others without remorse. In sociology, we often talk about Erving Goffman and his ideas about impression management, and if his theory was cynical, this stuff even more so. I think I'm long on time, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. You can see this as an extension of Christopher Lasch's culture of narcissism argument, which if you haven't read, I implore you to read it. And then finally, crime does not manifest in a vacuum. There's a lot of social forces going on right now motivating this. So one of my areas is conspiracy theories. I've got a book out now on it, and I have a book coming out late spring on QAnon. But that research explores accounts like Libs of TikTok, and Andrew Tate, who promote toxic masculinity, and they stigmatize queerness and promote this idea that gays are groomers, coupled with this idea of American exceptionalism, that if you go viral, you'll make it big. That's a recipe for disaster. We haven't really reckoned with this idea of a post-truth society either. What we see online is often taken at face value. And there's a moral panic around child safety. When I was in the archives, there's a whole section on Anita Bryant from the 1970s. And the rhetoric I saw in this study mirrors the same rhetoric from the 1970s. The same story of projection just gets told through a new lens. The song remains the same. Also the satanic panic of the 80s. So I want to do what most sociologists are told not to do and just talk about the policy implications. I think this type of crime really calls for us to have a serious conversation about policing. I know you probably heard a number or read a number of scholars who've said that. Well, I'm saying it too. Other countries, they're way ahead of tracking this, of solving this. In Australia, if you go onto the app Grindr, you get a pop-up notification that warns you about the potential risks and dangers. That's because the Australian government has a very progressive approach to online safety that we just don't have. In this, I guess, new age of our austerity or new gilded age, it seems like a much better use of resources to police these assaults, these really heinous acts, than to police people just looking for love or entrapping people for really low-level drug crimes. The app developers, they also have a responsibility to prioritize safety of their users over anything else. I don't know how to do it, but some kind of age verification system or identity verification system probably needs to happen, and just better reporting systems. Again, one of the things that makes this a hidden problem is the amount of fake content that's online, making people like a very prolific extortionist who is sending 300 messages a minute using dozens of accounts simultaneously. He had literally a wall of phones wired to his computer so that he could do this. So long as platform capitalism continues to operate in its current state, dating apps will never truly connect us, and instead keep us on them because attention is profitable. Finally, a community conversation needs to happen. Organizing at the community level, destigmatizing and stopping others in the queer community from policing queer bodies that then translates to shame over their sexual behaviors, true or not. And they also need to lead the conversation about how to protect the queer community. The Australians advocate for a whole of government approach, which is basically what I'm advocating for here. So, in conclusion, I argue that we, as a gay community, we've given up our ties to each other and handed them over to app makers who then profit off of our emotions, off of our feelings of alienation and isolation that seem to persist in this modern era and maybe even getting worse. Rua Benjamin is one of the first to have written extensively on the fact that tech companies, they appear neutral, but in fact they aren't. They may act as though they're fulfilling a crucial need, but they're actually not delivering on their promises. As she writes about in her book, The New Jim Code, their apps are increasingly a part of this integrated state apparatus. So I said that I would leave on a high note, and I promise I will. So I'm seeing a lot of glimmers of hope. I'm seeing queer collectives meet and have these parties where they delete their social media accounts, where they encourage each other to log off dating apps and to instead meet each other. Nightclub spaces are now increasingly not allowing phones to be used. Underground speakeasy venues, some of which I now know of, are emerging that resist this profit motive. And many of these movements, they resemble the rhetoric of queer liberation, again, that you can read about in the Murray archives. These spaces, they prioritize different ways we can connect, both spiritually, psychologically, physically, and in all kinds of ways. As my friend and neighbor Jim Mercer likes to remind me, that the joy of being gay is our ability to connect with many others and not limit ourselves. I think that as we continue to turn away from being what's known as terminally online, we'll see a diminishment of negativity and a return to localized practices that have the potential to truly liberate us. Thank you. I put together a list of additional reading in case anybody's interested. I've got more. I kind of just threw this together, but there you go. Any questions? Yeah.
Thanks, it's really interesting. On your hopeful side, which I like very much like to counter the kind of investments in our students. So but they're all about going offline. Are you implying you think any kind of app, anything online is going to go?
Absolutely not. The new thing is Discord, which involves creating local communities. And so there are a lot of people who use that particular app to create what we might call micro communities in the literature, and resist being monitored and surveyed. But again, there's issues and problems with that. I hope someone will develop something that truly resists this kind of corporatization of community. So, in some ways, yes, in some ways, no.
So what is it about, anyway, thanks very much for the talk, I really enjoyed it. What is it about the culture or the development of the UK and Australia that they're, as you said in so many ways, they're so much farther ahead in attending to these problems and trying to address them? Do you have any insight into that?
Our carceral system is punitive. Theirs is organized around harm reduction. It's organized around protecting people. Ours, totally different. And this is something I talk about in my criminology class to my students, but it's a whole other thing when you're actually like in a project like this and talking with people from other countries. You really get to see how they just have a dramatically different way of policing. That's refreshing. I'll never forget, I had a robbery happen to me, and the police officer said, well, I'm going to take the case, but only because it'll be a feather in my cap for my promotion. They did not solve the case. I solved the case, actually, which is kind of interesting. I don't know. I hope you guys promotion. But it just speaks to how policing is way different here in the United States.
Thank you. We talked a little bit about this last time we had, but we're still fixated on the 13-year-old. Thinking, what is going to happen? And not only engaging in this kind of thing, but then essentially threatening the victim that I'm going to get out quickly and I'll come back. Like, how prevalent is it? That's super scary.
Yeah. So for those of you who didn't hear, she's asking about the 12 and 13-year-olds who are wrapped up in this. I think it goes back to that dark triad stuff that like social media really kind of rewards being just absolutely the worst version of ourselves. And I exist in that kind of buffer zone. I can remember time before computers, right? But these kids have grown up with this. They grew up with Facebook. They grew up with Instagram. They grew up with dating apps. this is just another playground for them. This is akin to the kid who plays with matches and starts a fire. I think these app developers have engineered a great system that really brings out a kind of dark side in humanity. It gave birth to a conspiracy theory about political parties. It gave birth to a lot of other heinous stuff that we see.
We have a sense of targeted over like younger actors. Are they like single actors? I don't know what came up.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Are they like, kind of small groups of them that is also spurring each other? I don't.
So it's usually groups, and one of the things that we found when we were looking into these cases is older offenders will often recruit younger offenders, and they'll use them as a shield. And by that I mean, if I want to FOIA request a particular case and there's a person who's underage, the police are going to say no because it involves a minor. When they go to prosecute that, it also creates an additional layer, especially if they're trying to charge all of them. And that means it will go to the juvenile court system rather than the adult court system, potentially. So it adds this additional dimension to it. It keeps it kind of hidden, but also they're right. They are going to get lesser sentences. And oftentimes these crimes just go unprosecuted. I'm sure you got questions. Yes, go ahead.
With like the current administration, do you think that any of like the policy changes that you talked about like are possible, or would it be like more of like a state by state like basis? That's a very positive.
That's a big question. See, this is why I love you guys ask the big questions. With the current, so I don't think so, and the reason why is because one of the first acts this current administration did was it kind of diverted funding away from cybercrime and crypto scams. And I don't think it's much of an overstep to say some of the people within the administration's orbit are companies like Palantir, who I already mentioned, and Crypto Bros, who in many ways profit off of this. And also I don't think, like, law enforcement also doesn't like me poking around about this because they're using this as a surveillance tool. And so me asking questions, bringing this to light, this is one of their tools. So they don't want to give that up.
Can you hear more about how Palantir is being used?
So that part I really don't know. I only stumbled off this by total accident, and I was going to create an account just to see what I could get because sociologists are awful. They're like, they listen to your conversations, they eavesdrop. But I was like, I'm not going to hit that button because they basically want law enforcement only to be on that site. It's called Kodak, if you want to look into it. Essentially, if the idea is if a law enforcement agent knows that you're using the app to say traffic drugs or traffic humans, they can log into the back end and request that info. But I don't know how far that goes beyond that. And there's a gentleman I have we're gonna have a chat. He's an online influencer, and he talks about how people in recovery often have issues with these apps. for various reasons. And I wonder how much of them are getting kind of swept up in this. So I hope that answered your question. I wish I had more info on that. Sadly, I don't. I can tell you that there was a case in which a law enforcement agent used his headless torso. Some of you all may know what that means. So on Grindr, it's common for men to just put their torso, so no head, just their body, especially if they're like buff. This law enforcement agent in his mid to late 20s used his own photo and solicited men. And then at the very end of the conversation would say, oh, just so you know, I'm 17, right? And so he's basically entrapping individuals, right, who might have not even seen that message, right, because of how the apps work, how we use them. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. Sorry. Yeah.
Before the age of the internet, have like children always been involved and like been recruited for like these like violent crimes, or is this an instance that's unique to the internet?
So this is what I talked about today is relative, like this is totally new. You know, I'm sure there's a number of cases where people were maybe brutalized somehow before this. But the app itself only launched in 2008, and then there was a little bit of time before Jimmy Kimmel started making jokes about it on late night TV, and others, like, there's a lot of comedy skits I see about Grindr on late night TV. So now it's kind of out there, people know about it. But this is all kind of new. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, follow up. I love it. Yes.
Do you think that the reason that kids are being recruited is something that's unique to the age of the internet is because there's a lack of third spaces for children, and it's like their third space is becoming the internet, or it's like not monitored, and it's like you don't have spaces on the internet that are specifically for kids, specifically for teens, specifically for adults. It's like everyone merges together and are just exposed to everything.
Yes. So one of the things I didn't think we'd get into this, but this is kind of interesting. So my poor research assistants got exposed to the last and most important slide, right? My poor research assistants were exposed to like awful side of the internet, and they found so there's a case of there's an online cult that kind of sprung up through Roblox, which is it's a kids game, and these kids were then recruited into this cult, which coerces kids to engage in acts of self-harm, violence, and other crime, so that then the cult leaders have something they can hold over them to extort them with. I think it's 767 is the name of the cult. But I mean, if you just Google for Roblox cult, I'm sure it'll come up. So yeah, I think you're totally right. In fact, the other day I was thinking about there's a book by a sociologist who I've had the lovely opportunity to work with called Teenage Wasteland. And he doesn't talk about this specifically, but what he talks about is juvenile delinquency and the fact that there are a lack of third spaces, there's a lack of places for kids just to hang out. And when you don't have, green areas, when you don't have gathering places like a skate park, they'll get up to trouble, right? I was one of those kids, so. Not like this though. Yeah, in the back. So I had the joy of growing up during the BBS board days with dial-up modems and green screens. In those early days, you were a nerd if you went online. You were a dork, right? But we had our own culture, and there's a podcast, one of my favorite ones, called the QAnon Anonymous podcast, that has an episode about cyberfuturism, and they talk about the early days of the internet had this optimism to it. Shirley Turkle, a sociologist, has written about this. In the early days, there was this optimism about the internet, its ability to bring change. Even Simon Gottschalk was writing about Second Life as this kind of new alternative world where we would, social divisions would be kind of level. And then it became corporatized, and it got ruined, right? And all of this stuff, as it's just been commodified, as it's been corporatized, has just been even worse. I think it's going to take, someone with some kind of legislative authority to come in and put guardrails up. And, of course, now we're having to work backwards. And we're working against people who control these platforms that have libertarian values, who don't want regulation at all. They don't want to be, they often refer to this idea of the free marketplace of ideas. But that's not always a good thing, right? I want to live in a world where my Google search results are actually get me what I want, give me the info I need, rather than who's paying to be at the top. Cory Doctorow calls that enshittification, by the way, in case you're interested. So no, the internet is not doomed, but we all need to be more aware of what's going on, how these technologies are being used, and also lobby to get some guardrails up. And another thing that I talk about in my classes I teach is about police surveillance and the new technologies of policing and algorithmic policing, right? We know nothing about what is in those algorithms and how those algorithms rank us as potential criminals, nor is there a mechanism to get off those lists once you're on it. And I think that should be a matter of public concern. Hope that was kind of a weird winding answer, so I hope that got us there.
Well, if there are no more questions, let's thank Chris for a great talk.
Thanks for coming.
Edwards. I should say hello to the fellows as well.
Hi.
Gene Burns.
Good to meet you.
Yeah, I used to be a social teacher, but I have years ago.
That's kind of how I started in search of the social. I was interested in music subcultures, and then I got bored with that. It's pretty other stuff. So,
Yeah, I do more in college with
no, I'm glad you came. I just didn't know it's a department yet because they're having talks.
Can't really do right now, I'm not sure yet. Really interesting.
I wish I had my dagger.
So why are you, what are you doing?
Yeah.
How long do you?
So they're week-long stints, this one ends on Sunday.
Yeah.
Then I'm back in January.
That's great.
Pleasure to meet you. Yeah. And thanks for your questions. I really appreciate it. Hello. Nice to meet you.
That's great.
I love the J School students.
I'm always worried about students.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
right. Exactly. That is actually right. That's how I operate too.